History of the World by J. M. Roberts. Book 4 The Age of Diverging Traditions. Chapter 5 The Making of Europe. This settlement was not long untroubled, but it was decisive in a broad and important way. It effectively founded the political distinction of France and Germany, whose roots lay in West and East Francia. Between them, it set up a third unit with much less linguistic, ethnic, geographical, and economic unity. Lotharingia was there in part because three sons had to be provided for. Much future Franco German history was going to be about the way in which it could be divided between neighbors bound to covet it and therefore likely to grow apart from one another in rivalry. No royal house could guarantee a continuous flow of able kings, nor could they forever buy loyalty from their supporters by giving away lands. Gradually, and like their predecessors, the Carolingians declined in power. The signs of breakup multiplied, an independent kingdom of Burgundy appeared, and people began to dwell on the great days of Charlemagne, a significant symptom of decay and dissatisfaction. The history of West and East Franks diverged more and more. In the West, Francia, the Carolingians lasted just over a century after Charles the Bald. By the end of his reign, Brittany, Flanders, and Aquitaine were to all intents and purposes independent. The West Frankish monarchy thus started the 10th century in a weak position, and it had the attacks of Vikings to deal with as well. In 911, Charles III, unable to expel the Norsemen, conceded lands in what was later Normandy to their leader Rollo. Baptized the following year, Rollo set to work to build the duchy for which he did homage to the Carolingians. His Scandinavian countrymen continued to arrive and settle there until the end of the 10th century. Yet, somehow they soon became French in speech and law. After this, the unity of the West Franks fell even more rapidly apart. From confusion over the succession, there emerged a son of a Count of Paris who steadily built up his family's power around a domain in the Isle de France. This was to be the core of the later France. When the last Carolingian ruler of the West Franks died in 987, the man's son, Hugh Capet, was elected king. His family was to rule for nearly 400 years. For the rest, the West Franks were divided into a dozen or so territorial units ruled by magnates of varying standing and independence. Among the supporters of Hugh's election was the ruler of the East Franks. Across the Rhine, the repeated division of their heritage had quickly proved fatal to the Carolingians. When the last Carolingian king died in 911, there emerged a political fragmentation which was to characterize Germany down to the 19th century. The assertiveness of local magnates combined with the stronger tribal loyalties than in the West to produce a half dozen powerful dukedoms. The ruler of one of these, Conrad of Franconia, was chosen as king by the other dukes, somewhat surprisingly. They wanted a strong leader against the Magyars. The change of dynasty made it advisable to confer some special standing on the new ruler. The bishops therefore anointed Conrad at his coronation. He was the first ruler of the East Franks so to be treated, and perhaps this is the moment at which there emerges a German state distinct from Carolingian Francia. But Conrad was not successful against the Magyars. He lost and could not win back the Lotharingia, and he strove with the support of the church to exalt his own house and office. Almost automatically, the dukes gathered their peoples about them to safeguard their own independence. The four whose distinction mattered most were the Saxons, the Bavarians, the Swabians, and the Franconians, as the East Franks became known. Regional differences blood, and the natural pretensions of great nobles stamped on Germany in Conrad's reign the pattern of its history for 1,000 years. A tug of war between central authority and local power, not to be resolved in the long run in favor of the center as elsewhere, though in the 10th century it looked otherwise for a while. Conrad faced ducal rebellion but nominated one of the rebels his successor, and the dukes agreed. In 919, Henry the Fowler, as he was called, Duke of Saxony, became king. He and his descendants, the Saxon emperors or Ottonians, ruled the Eastern Franks until 1024. Henry the Fowler avoided the ecclesiastical coronation. He had great family properties and the tribal loyalties of Saxons on his side and brought the magnates into line by proving himself a good soldier. He won back Lotharingia from the West Franks, created new marches on the Elbe after victorious campaigns against the Wends, made Denmark a tributary kingdom and began its conversion, and finally he defeated the Magyars. His son, Otto I, thus had a substantial inheritance and made good use of it. In disciplining the dukes, he continued his father's work. In 955, he inflicted on the Magyars a defeat which ended forever the danger they had presented. Austria, Charlemagne's east march, was recolonized. Though he faced some opposition, Otto made a loyal instrument out of the German church. It was an advantage of the Saxon emperors that in Germany, churchmen tended to look with favor to the monarchy for protection against predatory laymen. A new archiepiscopal province, Magdeburg, was organized to direct the bishoprics established among the Slavs. With Otto ends, it has been said, the period of mere anarchy in Central Europe. Under him, certainly, we have the first sense of something we might call Germany. But Otto's ambition did not stop there. In 936, Otto had been crowned at Aachen, Charlemagne's old capital. Not only did he accept the ecclesiastical service and anointing which his father had avoided, but he afterwards held a coronation banquet at which the German dukes served him as his vassals. This was in the old Carolingian style. 15 years later, he invaded Italy, married the widow of a claimant to the crown of Italy, and assumed it himself. Yet the Pope refused him an imperial coronation. 10 years later, in 962, Otto was back in Italy, again in response to an appeal by the Pope for help, and this time the Pope crowned him. Thus was revived the Roman and the Carolingian ideal of empire. The German and Italian crowns were united again in what would one day be known as the Holy Roman Empire and would last nearly 1,000 years. Yet it was not so wide an empire as Charlemagne's, nor did Otto dominate the church as Charlemagne had done. For all his strength, and he deposed 2 popes and nominated 2 others. Otto was the church's protector, who thought he knew what was best for it, but he was not its governor. Nor was the structure of the empire very solid. It rested on the political manipulation of local magnates rather than on administration. Nevertheless, the Ottonian Empire was a remarkable achievement. Otto's son, the future Otto II, married a Byzantine princess. Both he and Otto III had reigns troubled by revolt, but successfully maintained the tradition established by Otto the Great of exercising power south of the Alps. Otto III made a cousin Pope, the first German to sit in the chair of St. Peter, and followed him by appointing the first French Pope. Rome seemed to captivate him and he settled down there. Like both his immediate predecessors, he called himself Augustus, but in addition, his seals revived the legend renewal of the Roman Empire, which he equated with the Christian Empire. Half Byzantine by birth, he saw himself as a new Constantine. A diptych of a gospel book painted nearly at the end of the 10th century shows him in state, crowned and orb in hand, reviving the homage of four crowned women. They are Sclavonia, Slavic Europe, Germany, Gaul, and Rome. His notion of a Europe organized as a hierarchy of kings serving under the emperor was Eastern. In this, there was Gallomania as well as genuine religious conviction. The real basis of Otto's power was his German kingship, not the Italy which obsessed and detained him. Nevertheless, after his death in 1002, he was taken to Aachen, as he had ordered to be buried beside Charlemagne. He left no heir, but the direct Saxon line was not exhausted. Henry II, who was elected after a struggle, was a great grandson of the Henry the Fowler. But his coronation at Rome hardly hid the reality. He was a German ruler, not Emperor of the West at heart. His seal's inscription read, Renewal of the Kingdom of the Franks, and his attention was focused on pacification and conversion in the German East. Though he made three expeditions to Italy, Henry relied there not on government but on politics, the playing off of factions against one another. With him, the Byzantine style of the Ottonian Empire began to wane. Thus, the 11th century opened with the idea of Western Empire still capable of beguiling monarchs, but with the Carolingian inheritance long since crumbled into fragments. They set out the lines of European history for ages to come. The idea of Germany barely existed, but a political reality did, even if still inchoate. The curious federal structure, which was to emerge from the German Middle Ages, was to be the last refuge of the imperial idea in the West, the Holy Roman Empire. Meanwhile, in France too, the main line of the future was settled, though it could not have been discerned at the time. West Francia had dissolved into a dozen or so major units over which the suzerainty of the Capetians was for a long time feeble, but they had on their side a centrally placed royal domain, including Paris and the important Diocese of Orleans and the friendship of the Church. These were advantages in the hands of able kings, and able kings would be forthcoming in the next 3 centuries. The other major component of the Carolingian heritage had been Italy. It had gradually become more and more distinct from the territories north of the Alps. Since the 7th century, it had been evolving away from the possibility of integration with Northern Europe and back towards re emergence as part of the Mediterranean Europe. By the middle of the 8th century, much of Italy had been subjugated by Lombards. This barbarian people had settled down in the peninsula and had adopted an Italianate speech. But they remained an aggressive minority whose social tensions demanded release in frequent wars of conquest, and they had shaped the Catholicism they had adopted to their own needs and institutions. In spite of the theoretical survival of the legal claims of the Eastern emperors, the only possible balancing power to them in Italy until the 8th century was the Pope. When the Lombard principalities began to consolidate there under a vigorous monarchy, this was no longer enough. Hence, the evolution of papal diplomacy towards alliance with the Carolingians. Once the Lombard kingdom had been destroyed by Charlemagne, there was no rival in the peninsula to the papal states. Though, after the waning of the Carolingians' power, the popes had to face both the rising power of the Italian magnates and their own Roman aristocracy. The Western Church was at its lowest ebb of cohesion and unity, and the Ottonians' treatment of the papacy showed how little power it had. An anarchic Italian map was another result of this situation. The north was a scatter of feudal statelets. Only Venice was very successful. For 200 years, she had been pushing forward in the Adriatic, and her ruler had just assumed the title of Duke. She is perhaps better regarded as a Levantine and Adriatic rather than a Mediterranean power. City states, which were republics, existed in the south at Gaeta, Amalfi, Naples. Across the middle of the peninsula ran the Papal States. Over the whole fell the shadow of Islamic raids as far north as Pisa, while emirates appeared at Taranto and Bari in the ninth century. They were not to last, but the Arabs completed the conquest of Sicily in 902 and went on to rule it for a century and a half with profound effects. The Arabs shaped the destiny of other West Mediterranean coasts of Europe too. Not only were they established in Spain, but even in Provence, they had more or less permanent bases, one of them being Saint Tropez. The inhabitants of European coasts of the Mediterranean had, perforce, a complex relationship with the Arabs, who appeared to them both as freebooters and as traders. The mixture was not unlike that observable in the Viking descendants, except that the Arabs showed little tendency to settle. Southern France and Catalonia were areas in which Frankish had followed Gothic conquest, but many factors differentiated them from the Frankish north. The physical reminiscences of the Roman past were plentiful in these areas, and so was a Mediterranean culture. Another distinctive characteristic was the appearance of a family of Romance languages in the south, of which Catalan and Provençal were the most enduring. In AD 1000, the peripheral Europe of the north barely included Scandinavia, if Christianity is the test of inclusion. Missionaries had been at work for a long time, but the first Christian monarchs only appeared there in the 10th century, and not until the next were all the Scandinavian kings Christian. Long before that, pagan Norsemen had changed the history of the British Isles and the northern fringe of Christendom. For reasons which, as in the case of many other folk movements, are by no means clear, but are possibly rooted in overpopulation, the Scandinavians began to move outwards from the 8th century onwards, equipped with two fine technical instruments. A longboat with oars and sails could take across seas and up shallow rivers, and a tubby cargo carrier which could shelter large families, their goods and animals for 6 or 7 days at sea. They thrust out across the water for 4 centuries and left behind a civilization which, in the end, stretched from Greenland to Kiev. Not all sought the same things. The Norwegians who struck out to Iceland, the Faroes, Orkney, and the far west wanted to colonize. The Swedes who penetrated Russia and survive in the records as Varangians were much busier in trade. The Danes did most of the plundering and piracy the Vikings are remembered for. But all these themes of the Scandinavian migrations wove in and out of one another. No branch of these peoples had a monopoly of any one of them. The Viking colonization of remote islands was their most spectacular achievement. They wholly replaced the Picts in the Orkneys and the Shet Islands, and from them extended their rule to the Faroes, previously uninhabited except for a few Irish monks and their sheep, and the Isle of Man. Offshore, the Viking lodgment was more lasting and profound than on mainland of Scotland and Ireland, where settlement began in the 9th century. Yet the Irish language records their importance by its adoption of Norse words in commerce, and the Irish map marks it by the situation of Dublin, founded by the Vikings and soon turned into an important trading post. The most successful colony of all was Iceland. Irish hermits had anticipated Vikings there too, and it was not until the end of the 9th century that they came in large numbers. By 930, there may have been 10,000 Norse Icelanders living by farming and fishing, in part for their own subsistence, in part to produce commodities such as salt fish, which they might trade. In that year, the Icelandic state was founded, and the thing which Romantic antiquarians later saw as the first European Parliament met for the first time. It was more like a council of the big men of the community than a modern representative body, and it followed earlier Norwegian practice. But Iceland's continuous history record is, in this respect, a remarkable one. Colonies in Greenland followed in the 10th century. There were to be Norsemen there for 500 years. Then they disappeared, probably because the settlers were wiped out by Eskimos, pushed south by an advance of the ice. Of discovery and settlement further west, we can say much less. The sagas, the heroic poems of medieval Iceland, tell us of the exploration of Vinland, the land where Norsemen found the wild vine growing, and of the birth of a child there, whose mother subsequently returned to Iceland and went abroad again as far as Rome as a pilgrim before settling into a highly sanctified retirement in her native land. There are reasonably good grounds to believe that a settlement discovered in Newfoundland is Norse, but we cannot at present go much further than this in uncovering the traces of the predecessors of Columbus. In Western European tradition, the colonial and mercantile activities of the Viking were from the start obscured by their horrific impact as marauders. Certainly, they had some very nasty habits, but so did most barbarians. Some exaggeration must therefore be allowed for, especially because our main evidence comes from the pens of churchmen, doubly appalled, both as Christians and as victims, by attacks on churches and monasteries. As pagans, of course, Vikings saw no special sanctity in the concentrations of precious metal and food so conveniently provided by such places and found them especially attractive targets. Nor were the Vikings the first people to burn monasteries in Ireland. Nonetheless, however, such considerations are weighed. It is indisputable that the Viking impact on northern and western Christendom was very great and very terrifying. They first attacked England in 793, the monastery of Lindisfarne being their victim. The attack shook the ecclesiastical world, yet the monastery lived on another 80 years. Ireland they raided 2 years later. In the first half of the 9th century, the Danes began a harrying of Frisia, which went on regularly year after year, the same town being plundered again and again. The French coast was then attacked. In 842, Nantes was sacked with a great massacre. Within a few years, a Frankish chronicler bewailed that the endless flood of the Vikings never ceases to grow. Towns as far inland as Paris, Limoges, Orleans, Tours, and Angoulême were attacked. The Vikings had become professional pirates. Soon, Spain suffered, and the Arabs too were harassed. In 844, the Vikings stormed Seville. In 859, they even raided Nîmes and plundered Pisa, though they suffered heavily at the hands of an Arab fleet on their way home. At its worst, think some scholars, the Viking onslaught came near to destroying civilization in West Francia. Certainly, the West Franks had to endure more than their cousins in the East, and the Vikings helped to shape the differences between a future France and a future Germany. In the West, their ravages threw new responsibilities on local magnates, while central and royal control crumbled away and men looked more and more towards their local lord for protection. When Hugh Capet came to the throne, it was very much as primus inter pares in a recognizably feudal society. Not all the efforts of rulers to meet the Viking threat were failures. Charlemagne and Louis the Pious did not, admittedly, have to face attacks as heavy and persistent as their successors, but they managed to defend the vulnerable ports and river mouths with some effectiveness. The Vikings could be and were defeated if drawn into full scale field engagements, and though there were dramatic exceptions, the main centers of the Christian West were on the whole successfully defended. What could not be prevented were repeated small scale raids on the coasts. When the Vikings learned to avoid pitched battles, the only way to deal with them was to buy them off, and Charles the Bald began paying them tribute so that his subjects should be left in peace. This was the beginning of what the English called Danegeld. Their island had soon become a major target to which Vikings began to come to settle as well as to raid. A small group of kingdoms had emerged from the Germanic invasions by the 7th century. Many of Romano British descendants were living alongside the communities of the new settlers, while others had been driven back to the hills of Wales and Scotland. Christianity continued to be diffused by Irish missionaries from the Roman mission, which had established Canterbury. It competed with the older Celtic Church until 664, a crucial date. In that year, the Northumbrian king, at a synod of churchmen held at Whitby, pronounced a favor of adopting the date of Easter set by the Roman Church. It was a symbolic choice determining that the future England would adhere to the Roman traditions, not the Celtic. From time to time, one or other of English kingdoms was strong enough to have some sway over the others. Yet only one of them could successfully stand up to the wave of Danish attacks from 851 onwards, which led to the occupation of the two-thirds of the country. This was Wessex, and it gave England its first national hero, who is also a historical figure, Alfred the Great. As a child of 4, Alfred had been taken to Rome by his father and was given consular honors by the Pope. The monarchy of Wessex was indissolubly linked with Christianity and Carolingian Europe. As the other English kingdoms succumbed to the invaders, it defended the faith against paganism as well as England against an alien people. In 871, Alfred inflicted the first decisive defeat on a Danish army in England. Significantly, a few years later, the Danish king agreed not only to withdraw from Wessex but to accept conversion as a Christian. This registered that the Danes were in England to stay. They had settled in the north, but also that they might be divided from one another. Soon, Alfred was leader of all the surviving English kings. Eventually, he was the only one left. He recovered London, and when he died in 899, the worst period of Danish raids was over, and his descendants were to rule a united country. Even the settlers of Danelaw, the area marked to this day by Scandinavian place names and fashions of speech as that of Danish colonization defined by Alfred, accepted their rule. Nor was this all. Alfred has also founded a series of strongholds as a part of a new system of national defense by local levies. They not only gave his successors basis for the further reduction of the Danelaw, but to set much of the pattern of early medieval urbanization in England. On them were built towns whose sites are still inhabited today. Finally, with tiny resources, Alfred deliberately undertook the cultural and intellectual regeneration of his people. The scholars of his court, like those of Charlemagne, proceeded by the way of copying and translation. The Anglo-Saxon noblemen and cleric were intended to learn the Bede and Boethius in their own tongue, the vernacular English. Alfred's innovations were a creative effort of government unique in Europe. They marked the beginnings of a great age for England. The shire structure took shape and boundaries were established, which lasted until 1974. The English church was soon to experience a remarkable surge of monasticism. The Danes were held in a United Kingdom through a half century's turbulence. It was only when the ability failed in Alfred's line that the Anglo Saxon monarchy came to grief and a new Viking offensive took place. Colossal sums of Danegeld were paid until a Danish king, this time a Christian, overthrew the English king and then died, leaving a young son to rule his conquest. This was celebrated Canute, under whom England was briefly part of the Great Danish Empire, 1006 to 1035. There was a last great Norwegian invasion of England in 1066, but it was shattered at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. By that time, all the Scandinavian monarchies were Christian and Viking culture was being absorbed into Christian forms. It left many evidences of individuality and strength in both Celtic and continental art. Its institutions survive in Iceland and other islands. The Scandinavian legacy is strong, marked for centuries in English language and social patterns, in emergence of the Duchy of Normandy, and above all, in the literature of the sagas. Yet, where they entered settled lands, the Norsemen gradually merged with the rest of the population. When the descendants of Rollo and his followers turned to the conquest of England in the 11th century, they were really Frenchmen, and the war song they sang at Hastings was about Charlemagne, the Frankish paladin. They conquered an England where the men of the Danelaw were by then English. Similarly, the Vikings lost their distinctiveness as an ethnic group in Kiev, Rus, and Muscovy.